Welcome, book lovers, to another edition of our online book club with me, Phil Svitek, and Marisa Serafini, where each month we pre-select the book to read and then we discuss it. So it will be spoiler-filled in that sense, but hey, maybe that way you can just join us for the conversation and hear what the book's all about. Also, we're going to talk about the various books that we've been reading off of the curriculum as well for pleasure. And then we'll, of course, highlight the books that we've got coming up so you can join us for those. But this month of April, we read Sherman Alexie's The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. Very provocative title. I've heard a lot of good things about this book. And also, there's some controversy around this book, which we'll certainly get into. But before any of all that, let's start with first things first. Your initial impression of this book.
Yeah, I mean, I thoroughly actually enjoyed it. I didn't really know what to expect going into this because I know this was your choice. I was like, ooh, this, because knowing that there's some controversy in there, and we'll get into that later. I thoroughly went in not knowing what it was about. And then I was already laughing by like the fifth page in. I'm like, okay, I think I'm gonna like this book. And I just did it in one sitting, one go, and I was like, boom, boom, boom. I couldn't stop reading. It was that enjoyable. There are some things I related to as just culturally and ethically in the ways that people of color think. Um, there are a lot of universal themes that are still relevant today. So I can see why a lot of people may not like it, but I can see why a lot of people love it. So yeah, I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, I would say it's the more mature version of like a Holes. Certainly not plot wise, but like the hardships and the nitty gritty. It's kind of like both are coming of age stories, or certainly very formative years. And so this story is about Arnold, aka Junior Spirit. He lives on the res in Washington, Spokane specifically, and kind of the pitfalls of he wants a better life for himself, but that's not ever been modeled for him. In fact, quite the opposite. And he makes a drastic turn to attend essentially a white school. So hence the absolutely true diary of a part-time Indian, because he's part-time Indian at the res, part-time, white. And overall, a big theme of it is finding his place because, he doesn't feel at home on the res where he should, but he certainly doesn't feel at home with the whiteys where he shouldn't, but wants to, at least
Hmm.
to some degree, while retaining his native pride, and so to speak. So, and the reason I make the comparison to Holes is because Holes is funny and comedic in that way. This is just a more mature version because you've got his best friend Gordy saying things like, "Hey, listen, when you read a book, you should have a boner." So
Yeah,
that's
very
just kind of
teenage prepubescent humor, you know.
yeah. So just for some quick context, so Sherman Alexie, he was born in 1966 as a Native American. So a lot of parallels. It's not quite a biography, but it is very semi autobiographical. He says about 70% of it is sort of true. He's written other books, um, like the where is it? The Lone Ranger and Tonto Fistfight in Heaven, Smoke Signals, Reservation Blues. This one was actually written in 2007. So, and he's done some poems and stuff like that called War Dances. So he's done quite a bit. And you do get photos, at least in this book, of him kind of growing up. So you see the parallels. His best friend is an amalgamation of his actual best friend and stuff like that. So a lot to draw from, but it is written in first person. It is written humoristically, but also very nitty gritty. I mean, I guess just to that, what stood out for you most in terms of, I mean, there's a lot. They say the F word, not the F word as in Fuck, but like just regularly, the pejorative of like, hey, you're gay. I
Hmm.
won't say it. I'll do better, I guess. I'll try to be better. But yeah, you got boner jokes, you've got your pussy jokes, like
Right. I think it was like regular contemporary vernacular that you would find within teenagers speaking to each other. When you get into a certain environment and you're around certain people, that's just how they talk. It was like their everyday language in that way. Yeah, there are what you would call curse words and used in the wrong terms, like the R word was dropped a few times. We know that words are said to say one thing, but they might actually mean something else, and they are insulting to certain masses and stuff like that. So I can see why there are some elements of this book that people would be like, nope, don't read that because it says this word, or don't say that because it reflects these people. Um, I say get over it. Honestly, we know in the context when we read it, that it's just the regular speech. It's not meant to be um you know, we're really mean or malicious in that way. But someone could read that out of context and say that's wrong and deem it unreadable and banned in that way. So that actually didn't bother me as much. But when reading it, I was like, oh, yeah, I can see why someone says, no, don't read this. Especially when it's teenagers, not saying condoning, like, say, alcohol, underage drinking, underage drug use, and stuff like that. It's not like it's encouraging it, but it also it's not fully condoning, like not condoning it either.
Yeah, I think as the first part of the title implies, the absolutely true diary, right? So we know that it's fictitious, but at the same time, I don't like when things look at whether it's the language that's being used through a 2024 lens, or just what's happening. It's like you can try to avoid it, but this was the reality back then, and in many ways, yeah, it's kind of a timeless story of like high school. There's drugs, there's sex, there's violence. It's kind of an ever present. It takes on different forms, but it's there. And I guess to go back to the beginning, Arnold himself, he starts off uh, in a bad spot. I mean, he's got a lot of health issues to begin with, so he's not like the most up and at 'em kind of kid. So, what was your, I don't know, your reading of that? I mean, he's got some, not brain. He's a smart kid, but like his brain could essentially rupture if hit in the wrong way.
Wrong spot. Um, it made me like the character right off the bat. The fact that he's awkward. If puberty hit him, like it was kind of, just adolescence was hard on him growing up, being physically awkward, mentally kind of awkward, but also being aware of it. He's like, yeah, I know I'm weird looking. I have a big nose, I have big feet, yada yada yada. Like I'm not your average 6'3" American guy that like everyone loves that you see in movies and TV shows. Like I'm a very physically awkward kid. So the fact that he's just like he laughs at himself about it, made him more endearing in that way. Like, okay, I can get with this guy. Because we most of us growing up, yeah, we're always awkward growing up. So I found him very relatable in that way. Just he's awkward, knowing he's awkward, but trying so hard to fit in or just be accepted. Yeah, that's relatable.
Yeah, and I mean, when you really look at it, like at first for me, it was nice to kind of hear what was going on, but it did feel a little bit in the early parts of like, okay, where is this going? But I think it overall sets up well for what will come because we'll certainly talk about that. But a lot of the beginning is spent a lot on his friend Rowdy, who's kind of his protector and so forth. Like they're inseparable. Um, and yeah, and in that way, Rowdy never treats what's his Arnold in any sort of special way. Like he'll punch him in the shoulder and quite literally put his health at risk because of his brain situation. But that's also why Arnold, in many ways, likes him. Is like, no, I feel normal around you.
Yeah. Um, and like that's what you kind of have to give to Rowdy. One, first, you shouldn't punch people. That's not the best healthy outlet of expressing yourselves, especially when you're angry or frustrated. So I can see where people be like, no, this condones violence. No, but that's just how. Rowdy expressed himself. He didn't know how to speak communicating like that, so he was more on the physical side. I saw that as his, I don't want to say love language, but that's his way of communicating and showing like some weird twisted brotherhood that he has with Arnold. And it felt more like a sibling kind of, well, like a brotherly relationship in that way. Like, I mean, you're a single child, but growing up with siblings who are just physically rough with you, it's a way of showing love and affection.
Yeah. Yeah, and certainly we'll talk about that, how that manifests, but the sort of the inciting incident in many ways is the day that, he's in school, he's a smart kid, but he gets a textbook that literally his mom had. And so, yeah, he just feels stuck, right? And, you said you related very heavily. So I have to imagine this probably is one of the parts that you related to of like, okay, where the hell is my life going and what can I do?
Right. I mean, so I say I relate because I grew up in literally a small town that doesn't have opportunities for advancement just in life, just in education, and when you're come from smaller places, your resources are limited. So I understand, and I was Asian in my community. I was me and my brother, we were the only Asians within 60 miles in every direction. So like I definitely stood out in the awkward way like that. So my parents wanted to put me in a better school, better education, better opportunities, 3 towns over. So I always had to commute to school, and at that school, I was with people who grew up in that town. And they were all white kids. They were all very cliquey. So I definitely understand being the outsider, literally coming from a different town, trying to do the exact same things that they're doing, even though you physically don't live there, you physically don't look like them, but you're trying to simulate your life and like raise your standards to that level. Um, yeah, that hit really hard with me.
Yeah. What was what was interesting to me was while it started off in that sort of typical fashion where like, okay, new kid doesn't fit in, he found his footing fairly, not easily, but in a realistic way for the book and true to the character. And I appreciated at least that switch up just a little bit. Like it's not that it was purely luck or, just easy. He certainly had to work. Like we'll talk about his basketball playing, and that was a big component of it. But yeah, I mean, between knocking out like the biggest kid and then getting Gordy, a good friend that's also intelligent, and then having Penelope, who neither loved each other, but they didn't hate each other. Like they were supportive for
Right.
each other, and were there. Like it was one of those romances that was right for the time.
Hmm.
Like it wasn't a forever thing, but in that moment, it was the best thing for both.
A relationship of convenience. Yes. What I did enjoy is that all of these relationships, quote unquote, friendships, they were slowly earned in their own way. We had each moment where like, oh, he punched out the big guy, gained respect. Oh, he helped Penelope, gained her respect. And especially when he even came to the basketball, him proving himself, he gained the team's respect. So like there were moments where everyone was still questioning him, but he did something that proved his worth, and the reason why, like, oh no, he's just like us too. Maybe we should give him a chance in that way to understand, like, oh yeah, everyone's basically the same. No matter like the color or where they're from, we're all still human. We're doing literally in the same place, doing the same thing.
Yeah, and the few times that there was any sort of tension, um, it was in that sense because Junior was withholding, and he thought they weren't going to accept him. And so then, one thing in particular that I'm thinking of is when Penelope goes up to him and says, like, "You're poor, aren't you?" And he doesn't
Mhm.
want to tell her, but it's like, it's okay. Like, we'll drive you home. You know, we paid for your dinner. Like, not a big deal, like it's okay. Just we got you, and
Yeah.
I think that certainly meant a lot to him for sure.
And I think that's where the caste system, I guess you can say, like really actually did help him in a way because I don't think he would have gotten that back on the reservation. Just this premeditated notion that he can't afford things, that it's shameful to not have as much money and make it like I get it, it's a very small town mentality too, not just like being on a reservation, just like smaller areas tend to have more scrutiny and judgment, like on the level of success. Like the more money you have, usually the more successful, the more like jobs or stuff you've had, the more successful you are. The bigger your family is, more success. It's crap like that. And so the fact that he didn't have like more materialistic items, money, it was like this shows that maybe he's not as successful as the white community. But I loved how that they acknowledged that and they didn't actually give him a hard time. They actually helped him, which that was a nice turning point for me with the community.
Yeah, and I definitely want to put a pin on the word nomad because I definitely want to talk about that. But speaking of the res itself, um, he got a hard time from some people, but then whether it was his dad's best friend and things of that nature, um, people did see him as inspiration, right? So there was him, but there was also his sister who was inspired by his story, so she kind of tried to go and find her life and stuff like that. But I bring up the best friend of the dad in particular because he would give him rides on occasion, right? And not for nothing, that was a big
Mhm.
deal. The whole reason why he wasn't getting rides every day was gas money. Like it was 22 miles or whatever it was to
Yeah.
get to school. So, um, they tried, and I appreciate that, to the extent that people within the community that were inspired, that weren't, um, you know, jealous or vengeful for him, did try to help in the ways that they could.
Yeah, and there's helpful because he was kind of getting it on both sides. People in the res would help him and people outside. Um and but it did break my heart knowing that like, oh, there were some days he had to walk and like then you kind of had to respect him and feel for him even more for his like the shit he's put himself through just to get a better education. And this and not just him, like everyone. Like people don't realize the struggles and crap that we put ourselves through just to better ourselves. And one of his things was walking 22 miles. I was like, shoot, have you done that in a day? It's a lot. It's a lot. And to do that every day, my God. Um, and to go to school and to study and do everything he was doing during the regular day, I mean, that's hard for a kid. No teenager should be able or should have to walk 22 miles to school.
And he's malnourished for the most part. Like it's not like he's
Yeah,
he's
it's not healthy.
tired. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole slew of things that already aren't helping that. So, but that's what, yeah, it is incredible. That's what it meant to him. He was like, I need to get out. And it was never hateful against the res. Um, but towards the end, he does sort of realize, like, we as Indians, or I think it's actually Rowdy who helps him realize that, Indians were nomadic. And it's like, you're the true Indian, because
Right.
you move around and we've actually become stationary here at the res. Um, but before, like, let's talk about the res particularly because, um, and in particular, so Grandma's spirit ends up dying. This white rich guy shows up. What did you think? Like that, not that it was like out of left field, but I was just so, it just happened and then nothing happened with it.
Right.
And that in itself became telling part of like, okay, this rich guy came in, like, and from your point of view, explain that scene because I'm just so fascinated by it.
It was it was fascinating, then anticlimactic, and also disappointing at the end. The reason why is like, hey, this white stranger comes into the town with a seemingly good motive, like, oh, this meant so much to me, this, coat, and I always felt bad. So like I'm trying to do the right thing and give it back to this rightful owner. Um, and but he seemed genuine. Like, no, this should go return back to the family. Go back to his proper place. I was like, okay, cool. He's trying to do the right thing. And then they're like, oh no, this actually can't be the grandmother. So I don't know where you got this. And then he's like, oh, okay, my bad. Maybe an embarrassment, but it felt like it actually came from a good place. So I actually felt bad for the guy, because it went nowhere. And he's like, oh, I tried to do a good thing and it fell flat. Or like it blew up in my face in that way. So I was like, I see where some people are trying to maybe like there are some occasions where people will make up an excuse to try to do something good for the community just to like kind of give back again, a little altruistic in that way. But this guy generally seemed like he cared, he's like, no, the family should have this, you know but then it turned out to be like, oh no, you're just another white guy who was trying to do something for us. And I'm like, ah. And so I'm kind of torn as a person of color. So I don't
Yeah, and
know.
it's an interesting because there is that commentary of it that like he was literally spewing the same stuff that every oh, I love your culture and this and that.
Right.
Um, and yeah, I think I don't know. That's why I think it's a good juxtaposition because in many ways, like the way he was treated in school ends up being it's like you don't need to you don't need to have these words like just do it, like his
Hmm.
coach in particular, right? Like that's you have Ted who's the rich white guy, but then his coach obviously not rich but like instilled actual belief into Arnold, right? So like just two completely different ways. And yeah, I mean, I think the big fallacy of Ted is certainly like he tried to do the thing and he tried to get an expert to like pinpoint, okay, this powwow dancing costume or not costume, but this garment. Essentially, it's like okay, it belongs to Spokane Indians, and like your expert is
Yeah, your
completely wrong and an
your
idiot.
information is a little off. Um, and that's what was the disappointing thing, because he said he's like, I really enjoy your culture. I collect all these things. Like he seemed genuine, like, oh, maybe he does. And then I was like, if he did a little bit more research, I think a true quote unquote fan would have known better or would have known properly where to look. And that's where I just questioned. I was like, was it actually made up or was he actually genuine? I don't know. I don't know.
I think, I think he was genuine, but he also had genuine naivete, right? Like it's just
Yeah.
like it's these blind spots that you just don't know, and it's like people saying this, bless your heart,
Right.
you
Right.
know?
It really was one of those moments. But it's also like I think he was a victim of just kind of putting an overgeneralization of a certain culture together. And that's where you could deem maybe some racism in there. But like you said, I think it was just pure ignorance that, oh, it said Spokane Indians. I guess it's you guys, but there are so many different assets, and facets in that way. And like it's can't just be that one. You can't lump them all together.
Yeah, yeah, that was a very interesting scene. All right, let's talk about the basketball aspect. You like basketball?
I
Basketball is
love basketball, Phil. I was watching the basketball game before we started. I love basketball. Yes. Continue.
So, we talked about how he earned the respect of his teammates by essentially, I mean, it's sort of, he never gave up, never quit sort of thing. So and he happened to have a really good jump shot. So obviously that helped. Um, Freshman on
Again,
the
I
varsity team.
I get it, man. And I think that's what helped with he gained the respect, but like physically, we started the book off saying, "Hey, I'm physically awkward." The fact that he was capable of like actually being a fairly good player, being, for basketball, it takes some athleticism, takes a lot of physical, coordination in that way. So the fact that he's good enough to make varsity, also applause there. But the work ethic, and I think that's what helped him. The fact that he walks 22 miles a day, he does all this, and he studies hard. He's actually smart, and I think the coaches realize, oh yeah, physically he might not be there, but he will put in the hard work. He's doing all the drills. He's taking literally all the hits from the biggest guy, taking a concussion from his ex best friend. It's like he's willing to get his hands dirty and put in the blood, sweat, and tears. He may not be the best player, but he's one of the most dedicated players, and I think that's also what helped him earn the respect from his coaches and his teammates. Like, yeah, he's not great, but he puts in the work.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly when it came down to it, they needed him, right? So the first game that they played, or certainly one that was highlighted, I don't know if it was like an actual first game, but they played against his high school that he was supposed to be going to, and that was not a very good homecoming. uh,
Right.
and they lost. And then, it became the number one seed versus the number two seed, and of course, the story, including by literally the media, was, hey, best friend versus best friend. How's this gonna end up? And yeah, I think in many ways that was a turning point also for Rowdy as well, where he literally got to see, that it's like it's a measuring stick for how much his best friend has changed in the best of ways. And so even him, he can't help but be like, yeah, I got you.
Right. And it also was one of those eye-opening things for Arnold too. It's like how quickly he wanted to be white. Be coming from now the all-white school, defeating a underdog of a school in that way, or like they were so the fact that the underdog school won first, the first game, and then unfortunately when you see them lose the rest of the season, and then they do the rematch and they lose again, you're like, all right, that was a big thing for the small school who probably won't ever win a game again. um because I get it. I come from a very small school that was literally the last on the roster during every single tournament against other schools because we were so small that we weren't even considered a competition. That like it was a joke that they even put us on the roster, let alone last. Um, so get it. So when like an underdog school has a big win like that, you're like, oh shoot, yeah, that these are your people, man. Don't forget also where you came from or where you come from literally every single day. And so fast he wanted to prove himself to his new school and against his old school. And like, yeah, the whole part-time going back and forth, slightly code switching in that way. That's literally being stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, and I mean, quite literally, every time he went back to the res, I mean, he was dealing with death and grief. I mean,
Yep.
so we talked about a little bit Grandma Spirit, who was his grandmother. Then we mentioned the dad's best friend, but he ended up dying. I mean, he got shot over
Yep.
alcohol. They were, I mean, quite literally, they were fighting over an alcohol bottle, and you get shot. It's like, who's gonna take the last sip? Boom. Well, now you're dead, so I guess I get the last
So I
sip.
guess it's me.
Um,
Um,
and then his sister, who was too drunk and she fell asleep in her RV and it went up in flames, and she was too drunk to, yeah.
to realize it. Yeah, and just shows that small towns sometimes it's just hard to get out where that's kind of your fate. Like if you just stay there, you can just like I don't know, it's not much of well, for us, it's like that doesn't seem like much of a life, but that's what else do they have to do in that area? What else do they have to live for? What else other opportunities to get them out. It kind of actually reminds me of the show Reservation Dogs. I don't know if you ever watched it. It's on FX. Go watch it. It's really great. But they really actually delve into the real reality of the lifespan of kids, people of like certain areas, like being on a res, is very limited. It's very short, and unfortunately, compared to those with money and health, like better health, better opportunities, and stuff like that. And I think it's just another showcase of poverty in that way too, which unfortunately is a big component.
Yeah, and that's what led to the alcoholism, and um, you know, his dad's an alcoholic, his mom's kind of an alcoholic. Um, Unlike Rowdy, who his dad is an alcoholic who beats the hell out of Rowdy, at least like um, for Arnold, his family they're not they're not violent in that way, which is a very big blessing for sure.
Right.
Um, so yeah,
But it's also a vicious cycle that they kind of knew you can it's hard to explain because I see it in my hometown also, or not always with alcohol, but with drug use too. Like my area had more bars than it did churches, like legit drugs and alcohol were way more accessible. And that's what they know. That's how they grow up. It becomes a vicious cycle. The parents drink, therefore the kids drink, therefore their kids drink. And like if you don't get yourselves out of that, you're gonna be stuck there just doing the same things your parents are doing. And that's why you have to appreciate Arnold for being actually smart, being educated, knowing that, and being aware, like, hey, I want to break that cycle. I want to get out of that and do something else besides what is destined for the people in this area. You become a product of your environment, and you get that a lot with small town areas.
yeah. What I did appreciate was that there was almost like peace by the end, because I love that it circled back to Rowdy and him, and Rowdy was the one who gave him permission of like, hey, you're meant to be out there, but also just send me a postcard wherever you go. And that was like the bow on everything for me, because I think it is easy to sort of leave and then forget. And obviously, travel will change you and things like that. But yeah, it just felt I wouldn't have felt good if Arnold left and they would not be good friends. You know?
Friends anymore. Yeah, and like the whole sending postcards, like don't remember where you come from, but like just don't forget me in that way. Like he really did cherish that friendship. And especially when they climbed the tree together at the end, like, hey, we might die. Like legit we could fall off a limb and pummel to our death. But this is something that they had together, and they were literally looking at their world, their town from a completely different perspective, like at a place that they live and grow up and look at and see every single day, but was looking at it like with a different eye. Um, and that was pretty cool too, to see like, oh right, we do live in a cool place, like a very beautiful place if you just like actually take the moment to appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, at the end of the book, there's a few questions. They're discussion guide questions. So, one thing we haven't talked about is the animations or the cartoons. So it's not just a novel; it's got his sketches. And so this is question number two from the discussion guide. By drawing cartoons, Junior feels safe. He draws because, quote, I want to talk to the world, and I want the world to pay attention to me, end quote. How do Junior's cartoons, for example, who my parents would have been if somebody had paid attention to their dreams, and white, and white Indian show understanding of the ways that racism has deeply impacted his and his family's life. Now, you don't have to answer that specific one, but let's talk about
Right.
cartoons themselves.
First of
Yeah,
all, I love them. And I think, we know drawing, being artistic is also a healthy creative outlet in that way. Um, and I think like it's a medium that you can kind of get away with some racism if it's told or like expressed in a comedic way. Better than if you said it like verbally or something. And I was like, I mean, come on. The New York Post like makes a bunch of cartoons that joke about the current climate of everything. So all these cartoons were very realistic in a very um comedic cartoonish way that lightened the seriousness of what he was actually going through. And also it again made him more real. It felt like a teenager was definitely writing in a journal.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too that's what brought him and his sister closer, at least in his mind's eye, was, she had her writing of, I guess, these erotica novels that no one's ever read except for the one teacher. And then, he had his drawings, but he didn't know about that about his sister. But once he found out, he was like, oh, we both have this, and it isn't a viable outlet to just kind of express yourself in the best way that you can. So
Yeah.
I definitely enjoyed it. The many, and I thought they were effective. Like, we talked about him going to school, the 22 miles. So through just like six drawings, he created a fun little montage, right?
Yeah.
Around-
And the moment like where he threw a book and hit his teacher and broke his nose, also pretty funny to look at. Not funny in reality where he literally broke someone's nose and got suspended for it. But like looking at their cartoon, hilarious.
Yeah, and certainly, I mean, going back to that moment, that was the same teacher. Like, he thought he was essentially done for, but the teacher comes to him and apologized to him, and
Yeah.
he's kind of the catalyst um, to push him forward and says, "You need to get the hell out of here. You're better than this place, and if you don't leave, you're fucked.
Yeah.
So get to it." Um,
And that kind of reminded me of like of me just pulling other media sources for us. Um, Goodwill Hunting. You have Ben Affleck and Matt Damon's character, and Ben Affleck's character says to I can't I'm totally blank, like Will. Um, he's like, if you're still here in this town, like in 20 years, I'm gonna kill you. Like, I'm gonna fucking kill you because you are talented, you have intelligence. If you're wasting your life here, what's the point? Like, you have a ticket to get out of this area. You have an opportunity to live a better life than we do, than the people who know that are stuck here. So, like, if you have all this ability and not do anything with it, then that's a waste of life. And I think that kind of had the same feel and emotional aspect from the teacher, like, yo, you have something special here, don't waste it.
yeah, yeah, no, that's actually a very good comparison because I mean, that's more adult thing, but it's certainly
Right.
got the violence, the alcohol aspect, and all that, and so for sure, definitely a good comparison. Well, as we mentioned, this was written in 2007, and it got good reviews. In the New York Times, they wrote, for 15 years now, Sherman Alexie has explored the struggle to survive between the grinding plates of the Indian and white worlds. He's done it through various characters and genres, but The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian may be his best work yet. Working in the voice of a 14-year-old forces Alexie to strip everything down to action and emotion so that reading becomes more like listening to your smart, funny best friend recount his day while waiting after school for a ride home. Pretty good review.
Yeah.
Um,
Basically.
so, but, and it's been sort of taught in schools. So it's a text that many English teachers use in order to educate their students about Native American heritage. Teachers refer to the textbook. Sherman Alexie in the classroom to claim that the book provides an opportunity to educate non-Native American students to work through their white guilt and develop anti-racist perspectives. However, not everyone feels that it is appropriate, given that it acknowledges poverty, alcoholism, and sexuality. It's got obviously it's got profane language. I wouldn't say very profane, but
Hmm.
it's deemed anti-family, depictions of bullying, gambling, racism, drugs, and all that. Anti-Christian content. Yes, that is the thing.
Yep.
It's been banned in a lot of sort of places, mostly in the South, unfortunately. Um,
That doesn't surprise me.
but it's yeah, I don't know. I For it having been banned, I almost thought of like it. I was like, oh, I was expecting more. You know, it's always a
Mhm.
surprise what gets banned. It's like this got banned, really?
Right.
Uh,
And I think that yeah, it's like I can see if you just like really pinpoint certain parts of the book, I can see like a bunch of people like, nope, don't read this. It has this, this, and this. But overall, if you're just remembering the perspective of which the story is being told, is a 14-year-old boy who doesn't know much about the world. Most of the profanity came in from his everyday language with his best friend. The racism came in from his everyday living with his people in the culture. It's just like there's so many things. And even at the end of reading this book, I don't remember much of anything that like really upset me enough to say, oh, this should be banned. Like those
okay.
moments were so fleeting that it shouldn't be something like this 1 second of a word that pissed me off should ban the entire book. No, no, it's not worth it.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's like I could look at Mean Girls, right? And obviously, pound for pound, the book is far gruesome than like Mean Girls, but it kind of has the same thing. It's got alcohol, it's got, sex, it's, it's got
Right.
bullying, albeit not necessarily as violent, but certainly more, it's got emotional violence in that regard. So I'm not just picking on Mean Girls. It's just, one that most people certainly know of. So it's like I don't know. Yeah, I just hate that aspect of it. You know,
Right.
don't ban
It's
books.
like they really had to nitpick this book to get it banned. They had to pick specific points for it to be banned. The whole entire thing as entirety shouldn't be banned.
Yeah, I mean, if I have one, and it's not a criticism of the book, it's just a criticism in general. Is obviously this is not like I think it's a great perspective into the life of someone native, but it's not the entire spectrum. So
Right.
like don't take this and be like, I understand it. I understand native culture now, right? Don't be a Ted. Do not be a Ted.
No.
Uh,
Um and it's hard because it's a guy just trying to find his place between literally two different worlds. And I definitely understand that. I'm like I was Asian raised in a white community. And like yeah, I have an Italian last name. Like I definitely understand identity crisis and trying to fit in with your society and what you do. Um, but yeah, there's some racism in there, but that's going to be implied by the people who you grow up with, who you're surrounding yourselves with. So I can see some people like, oh, it's against it's the Indian perspective against the white people. This is how white people act, and this is the white people how they treat Indians. And you're like, no, you gotta. That's where you can't make it black and white. You have to look at the entire picture, and that's where it does become gray. Like you gotta throw yourselves and understand where he's coming from both perspectives.
yeah, and I appreciated that Arnold himself always understood it. Like even though Rowdy was giving him so much shit throughout the year, he was like, I get where he's coming from, you know? Like I
Mhm.
left. Um, you know, Rowdy's not good at expressing emotion. Certainly his dad doesn't express emotions. And, he's the fact that he's not doing everything onto others as has been done to him is a step forward for Rowdy, right? Like it's so.
Right.
And again, I'm not justifying it. I don't think Arnold ever justifies it fully, but he's like, I get where it comes from.
Right. And like you feel for Rowdy too, because you know he has a terrible father. He doesn't have a lot of good things going for him in his life. And so when his best friend leaves him, that's a big loss for him. Yeah, that is basically like he's grieving a loss. So again, he doesn't know how to express himself healthily, so he acts out and behaves in such a more aggressive way, which is unfortunate. But we know it's not out of maliciousness; it's just out of being hurt. He's in pain. Um, but when we got these guys together at the end, you're like, no, they're good friends. You know, they're gonna be best friends. They'll be fine. That was kind of heartwarming.
Indeed. All right. Well, any final thoughts as we wrap up our part time with this little Indian?
Overall, I really did enjoy this. This hit closer to home than I thought it would. I'm not a Indian 14-year-old boy, but I definitely understand the perspective of trying to fit into a community coming from somewhere else if you're not originally from there. Yeah, because it's such a human nature for us to just want to fit in. It really is, no matter who you are, what age you are, what gender you are, what sexuality you are. It's just like we're all just trying to coexist with each other, and we find this the easiest way to coexist is to be like everybody else. And when you're not like everybody else, it's hard. It's hard when you stand out.
Indeed. All right. So, want to take us through what you've been reading off on the side?
Yeah, a few things. Uh, I just finished Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, who we have read, Poppy Wars, and I've mentioned Dragon Republic and, Burning God books. Great. I finished Yellowface. That was also good. I'm in the middle of reading Where Reasons End by Yi Lin, and then I'm gonna next read The Astonishing Color of After. Um, because May is coming up, AAPI month, which leads us into our next book, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. When I was doing research for what book we should choose, I got a whole list of Asian Pacific American authors, and those books that I'm currently reading were other choices that we could have read. I was like, well, I can only choose one for us, and I still decided to read the others too. So, hence the reason why I'm reading this.
Excellent.
I
Well,
really enjoy them. They're good.
so that's the May book. I haven't really been reading. I've been kind of continuing through Dune a little bit off on the side. Um, Dune is comprised of three books, so I've gone through book one. Now I'm on book two. Very it's always fun and confusing when they do that, but because I literally thought it was three books within one anyway.
Yeah.
So I've been going through Dune, and I enjoy it so far. But looking ahead, as you mentioned, we've got On Earth, We're Briefly Gorgeous. So that's May. In June, we've got Treasure by Clive Cussler. So we've got a Dirk Pitt adventure. If you guys have ever seen Sahara with Matthew McConaughey, that is what it's not based on this book, but Clive Cussler writes these, Dirk Pitt adventures. Think like James Bond. It's like, anyway, it's fun. So
Yeah.
even though it's a lot of pages, it's a very fast paced and should be a fun read. And then we have in July.
In July, because July being a summer month, and I thought, oh, what's a fun summer book? We're gonna read The Beach by Alex Garland. There was a movie that was adapted from this book, and Alex Garland, we've seen a lot of his movies come out, and this is yet another book. I was like, oh, hey, I know this book has a twist in it. I'm hearing good things, so I figured that'd be a good summer/thriller book for us.
Right on. And then in August, for no true particular reason, I chose Near to the Wild Heart by Clarice Lispector. And let's see, let me. It takes place in Brazil. So it was published in Rio de Janeiro in 1943, and it introduced Brazil to what one writer called Hurricane Clarice, a 23-year-old girl who wrote her first book in a tiny rented room and then baptized it with the title taken from Joyce. He was alone, unheeded, near the wild heart of life. The book was an unprecedented sensation of genius, and blah blah blah. So, um, I feel like it feels very much like what's that book? Kind of like Pride and Prejudice or Emma, but
Mm,
Brazilian. That's what it feels like.
okay. You
So
know,
we'll
I
see.
love Jane Austen. I'm a woman. So, okay.
I've
You
heard
got me.
good things. It's a relatively short read, and I figured, why not a Brazilian author? Why not a woman author? And one that's not about colonialization, but still
Yeah,
about the classes, because
but
it's got the
still.
caste system sort of in it. So
Okay. Fun. That's exciting. I've never heard of the book, so I'm like, we love our Brazilians. So, yeah, great.
so there you go. That's what we've got down the pipeline. Anyway, that about does it for us. But before we fully wrap out, Marissa, where can people keep up?
Everyone can follow me at Serafini TV.
I'm at Phil Svitek, and we appreciate you joining us and continue reading.